Let's move to law and licensing. Chair Hymas.
Thank you, Chair. The first action item up on the agenda is agenda item 11.2. This is a Tooele County School District waiver request. The motion for the board is that the committee moves that the board approve Tooele County School District's request for a waiver renewal under R277-121.
Any discussion of that motion? If not, let's go back to the top. Member Bogus.
Yes, sir.
Member Booth.
Yes.
Member Klein.
Yes.
Member Davis. Member Davis? Come
Yes.
back. Vice Chair Earl. Member Green.
Yes.
Vice Chair Hart.
Yes.
Member Hymas.
Yes.
Member Carey. He left, sorry. Member Lear. Member Norton.
Yes.
Member Reel.
Yes.
Member Straight.
Yes.
Member Wood.
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Member Earl on the motion
I'm a
to
yes.
approve. Yes. Okay, that passes. Back to Chair Hymas.
Agenda item 11.3, Utah Adult Education Policies and Procedures Guide, incorporated by a reference into R277-733. You may remember that this went to committee, came to the full board, went back to committee, and here we are again, back to full board. The motion for the board is that the committee moves that the board approve the update to the Utah Adult Education Policies and Procedures Guide, incorporated by reference into R277-733.
Discussion of that motion? If not, let's vote. Member Wood. Oh, there is
Yes.
discussion. Member Straight, were you to speak or
Oh, no,
vote?
I was turning on to
To vote, gotcha, okay. Member Wood then.
Yes.
Member Straight.
Yes.
Member Reel.
Yes.
Member Norton.
Yes.
Member Lear.
Yes.
Member Carey. Member Hymas.
Yes.
He's going to join again at some point, isn't he? Okay, at 7, gotcha. We got Member Hymas was a yes. Vice Chair Hart.
Yes.
Member Green.
Yes.
Vice Chair Earl.
Yes.
Member Davis.
yes,
Member Klein.
Yes.
Member Booth.
Yes.
And Member Bogus.
Yes.
And I'm a yes. That motion passes. Back to Chair Hymas.
Agenda item 11.4, R277-733, Adult Education Programs. This is an amendment subsequent to the previous vote that we just had. The motion for the board is the committee moves that the board approve R277-733, Adult Education Programs, the amendment, draft 1, on second and final reading.
Any discussion of that motion? If not, let's vote.
Sir,
Member
I'm
Bo-
just a tiny bit confused. I actually thought this was a misprint. So what is the amendment?
So we updated the manual, or whatever the proper term is,
Oh, so this is the rule.
and now we're changing the rule to
Never,
make sure
I
that.
apologize. Thank
yeah.
you.
Good question. Okay. Let's see. Start with Member Bogus.
Yes.
Member Booth.
Yes.
Member Klein.
Yes.
Member Davis. Vice Chair Earl.
Yes.
Member Green.
I was a yes also.
Member Davis, thank you. Got you. You're a yes. Member Vice Chair Hart.
Yes.
Member Hymas.
Yes.
Member Carey. Member Lear. I'm sorry. I gotta skip when I shouldn't, and I don't when I should.
Don't cut him out, he's coming back.
Okay. We'll hold for 2 hours. Member Lear.
Yes.
Member Norton.
Yes.
Member Reel.
Yes.
Member Straight.
Yes.
Member Wood.
Yes.
And I'm a yes. That passes. Back to Chair Hymas.
Agenda item 11.5, R277-320, Grow Your Own Teacher and School Counselor Pipeline Program. This is an amendment. The motion for the board. The committee moves that the board approve R277-320, Grow Your Own Educator Pipeline Program, draft 1, on second and final reading.
Any discussion of that motion? Member Klein.
Yes, I would like to amend lines 20 and 25 to change the or to an and.
Do we have a second?
Can we pull that up on the screen? Can we just have a second
Yeah,
to
let's give a
see what that
second
looks
to
like?
get that up, sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
to change or to and on
This is
lines
on-
20 and 25.
Then grant program candidate or candidate means for a school counselor or student who is, and then there are two items there that would now be an and, correct? Okay. 20 and 21.
Chair, can I ask staff to speak to,
Let's see
What
if we
that
have a,
might
I
look
don't know
like.
if we had a second, did we?
oh, you're right.
Did we have a second? We had,
Well, I would second it for the purposes of public discourse and debate because I would like to know more about it.
okay, let's go to maker of the motion, then back to Chair Hymus.
So I may speak to this?
Yes.
Okay, so in looking at that, my husband's a licensed clinical social worker, and he deals with licensing and interns, and he understands all of the requirements for supervision and such, and looking at those, he said those should be ands. Because otherwise, it allows certain people to work in the field with students when they're not, when they haven't reached the proper level, the qualification. And I don't have it right in front of me at the moment. Let's see. So it should be both, otherwise we leave kids open for being supervised or having people over them that may not be qualified yet.
All right, thank you, Member Klein. Chair Hymus had a question for,
Yeah, I just wonder if we can ask Dr. Height her thoughts on this and if and what this would change in the rule and how things are done.
Yeah, Chair, may I?
yes, please, thanks.
Dr. Malia Hyatt, the Executive Coordinator of Educator Licensing. By changing the language to an and instead of an or on line 20, as well as I think you also said 25. The challenge is that this is a program to prepare educators, and it pays for their education. So it would pay for them to take the coursework prior to completing the internship that is that starts in line 21. So this isn't about working in classes or working with students. It's about preparing people to become licensed school counselors.
So may I?
Go ahead, sure.
So now that I've got it in front of me, completing the candidate's hours of a supervised practicum or internship by applying appropriate school counseling practices under the supervision of a licensed school counselor. So that's 21 to 23, that's the or. Next to the other option, which is they're enrolled in an accredited school counseling master's degree program. So they're either enrolled in something or they're being supervised by someone and not enrolled to get a degree in that area. So this is a grow your own unlicensed individual, someone that's not necessarily going to school for it to qualify for a license.
So question, well, I think Chair Hymus
If we just
had
do
it.
the latter and not
Hold on,
both.
We got Matt. So is that another question, or should we turn to Chair Hymus for further questions? Dr. Height, is that something you want to respond to, or should
Yeah.
we turn to, okay.
Yes, so in line 2, a candidate's hours of supervised practicum and internship is only available to somebody who has already completed their in-class, the coursework for their master's degree. So you can't get to part 2 unless you've completed part 1. But what this rule is saying is that we will pay for the preparation of these candidates if they are in either one of those parts of their preparation, either in their coursework or completing their capstone clinical internship after the coursework is completed.
So is it, do we need to define candidate as somebody that is already gone through the education portion?
But I
Or
think I
that
can,
is in it
I think I
currently?
can use an example to explain, which at first I understand, but, so I could have a paraprofessional that works as a paraprofessional that wants to be a counselor, and they continue working as a paraprofessional while they go through the coursework. They're not practicing counseling. They're still, or they're working in the cafeteria, or they're working somewhere else. And so we pay for them to go to the classes, and then we also pay for them to do their internship. they never, by this rule, are allowed to practice what they're learning and without being licensed. This
Or
is just-
supervised.
Yeah, no.
Because it says it under the supervision
Right.
of,
Right.
so they can practice.
But they can do that already. It's called an internship, and it's completely, they have to disclose. Talk to them about internships, because it's very like official, and they have to disclose to everybody.
He has internships that work under him
Yeah,
all the
yeah,
time, and that's
but
why he said it
this-
still should be an and.
But this is to pay for somebody to get to that level, and we need to pay for those credit hours.
I don't read it that way.
So, but you've got to.
Chair
I mean,
Hymas
not
had,
you've got to read it, but you've got to go
I
through
just don't
those
see where it
steps.
says that in here, that's what I mean.
Yeah,
got
sorry.
it. Okay, I think Chair Hymas had a couple more
Well, I just-
clarifying questions as well.
Yeah, not necessarily
responses.
questions, if I could, Chair,
Yes.
just comments. I think, for the sake of time, I don't know if I need to call the question, but I think we have a pretty good idea of what Member Klein is saying and what staff has said. I'm wondering if we can move along here.
I don't see any further lights, and so I
Don't
think
make me call it then.
Well,
good
I
good
do have
interchange,
another,
so- calling it
Okay.
takes a 2/3 vote,
that's
but
fine.
if there's no more
I
lights,
have
we can just vote.
something else on this one after we vote on this.
After the Grow Your Own program or a
I
different
just have
item?
another one on Grow Your Own.
Oh, well, yeah, let's bring that now then.
Possibly,
Well,
but I just have a
question or
question
comment?
more. Yeah, but let's vote on the motion.
Okay, because it's not going to change.
I just thought he
Yeah.
wanted to move on to the
No,
next
you're right, I'm
agenda
sorry.
item.
Okay, so we do have a motion pending. Okay, let's vote. The motion is then to amend lines 20 and 25 to change or to and. Member Wood,
Yes.
Member Straight,
Yes.
Member Reel. This is not calling the question. This
No,
is on.
we're voting on Member Klein's motion. Sorry, so there was some unclarity
Okay,
there.
the motion is
We will start over. We're
for Member Klein to amend lines 20 and 25 to change or to and. So, Member Wood.
Sorry for that clarification. My civic clerk has shut down completely,
Oh.
so I'm trying to see the ands and ors.
Oh, geez.
So I apologize. This is a no.
Okay, Member Straight,
No.
Member
Sorry.
Reel,
No.
Member Norton,
No.
Member Lear,
No.
Member Carey, Member Hymas,
No.
Vice Chair Hart,
No.
Member Green. No. Vice Chair Earl,
No.
Member Davis. Member.
Yes.
Member Klein,
Yes,
Member Booth,
No.
Member Bogus,
No.
and Member Moss is a no. I think, yeah, I don't need to opine. Okay, back to the underlying motion, back to Member Klein. Did you have a different amendment?
yeah, I just had another, a couple questions. Can I ask staff on line 60, what is the definition of high leverage? High leverage teaching
for-
practices?
Is that a Dr. Height question?
Yes, or,
Might be a
Yeah,
Director
I can
Thronson.
speak to that. Do you want me to-
Superintendent Dixon.
Yeah, generally, thank you, Chair Moss. High leverage practices generally refer to those practices that get better student outcomes, better student results. So for example, in, let's say, math or literacy or whatever that might be, it's using both pedagogy and high-quality materials as well. But those kind of practices that we know get at better student outcomes. So they're research-based,
is it defined
evidence-based.
somewhere?
Dr. Norman or Katie probably knows where it's
On
defined.
line 35.
Yeah, it's defined on line 35 in the rule.
Thank you.
Oh,
Did you hear that?
Sorry,
Board Member
and
Klein,
where
line
does that
35?
definition come from? Social practices that research has demonstrated can impact, yeah. So we're, I guess, including, so there's your list of things. Sorry. I probably saw that. But I just wondered if we had like a USBE document specific to that fleshes those things out.
Katie Dewey Hill, sir, could probably answer that question if you want to take it offline or have her answer it now.
Does that answer the question, or was there any action on it, Member Klein?
If there is a manual or a document or something that goes with that fleshes those out, it would be nice to know before we vote what those actually entail.
Chair, may I?
Yes, please.
So we do have, sorry, this is not my computer, and I have to switch my fingers. We do have available on our website a support document provided to LEAs and educator preparation programs that defines high leverage practices. I mean, I'm happy to forward that to you.
Can you email that to all of us?
Sure.
And then while you're doing that, I had another question on the change in the title. We're taking out school or teacher and school counselor and replacing with educator. So school, and later on it mentions mentors also as educators. So are all of those, they all fall under our definition of educator? So they are all subject to educator standards, UPAC kind of discipline? If
I can answer it. Chair, may I?
Dr. Height?
Yes, all of the above are considered educators under under our rules, and also that change was directed by legislation to change the program's name to Grow Your Own Educator.
Okay. So they all sign like the educator code of conduct?
Yes. And are bound by educator ethics laws and rules and complete all of anybody who has an educator license.
Okay.
Okay. No further lights. Back to Chair Hymas.
I think
Member
we're ready
Bogus?
back to the motion.
Well, I just,
Let's vote.
I'm
Member
sorry,
Bogus,
I didn't
though.
have any questions till we started asking questions, sir. My question is this rule beyond anything in legislative code? Is there anything extraneous in it?
That for Dr. Height.
There is not.
Thank you.
Okay. So the motion is then that the board approves R277-320, Growing Your Own Educator Pipeline Program Amendment, Draft 1, on second and final reading. Member Bogus.
No.
Member Booth.
Yes.
Member Klein.
No.
Member Davis.
Yes.
Vice Chair Earl.
Yes.
Member Green. No. Vice Chair Hart.
Yes.
Member Hymas.
Yes.
Member Carey. Member Lear.
Still not here.
Member
Yes.
Lear.
Yes.
Member Norton.
Yes.
Member Reel.
Yes.
Member Straight.
Yes.
Member Wood.
Yes.
And I am a yes. That passes. Back to Chair Hymas.
Thank you, Chair. Agenda item 11.6, R277-930, English Language Learner Software. This is a repeal. The motion for the board is that the committee moves that the board repeal R277-930, English Language Learner Software, on second and final reading.
Okay, before we vote, I just want to say thanks to Katie. It's already in our inbox. She may have walked out, but thank you. That was quick. Okay, thank you. So, any discussion to the motion? All right, let's vote. Member Wood.
Yes.
Member Straight.
Yes.
Member Reel.
Yes.
Member Norton.
Yes.
Member Lear.
Yes.
Member Carey. Member Hymas.
Yes.
I'm just gonna make this a running gag. It's gonna be like an SNL skit. Where's Member Carey? Okay, Member Hymas.
Yes.
Member Vice Chair Hart.
Yes.
Member Green. Vice Chair Earl.
Yes.
Member Davis.
Yes.
Member Klein.
Yes.
Member Booth.
Yes.
Member Bogus.
Yes.
And I'm a yes. That passes. Back to Chair Hymas.
Agenda item 11.7, R277-400, School Facility Emergency and Safety, an amendment here. The motion for the board is that the committee moves that the board approve R277-400, School Facility Emergency and Safety, Draft 4, on second and final reading.
Any discussion of that motion? Member Klein?
Yes, this is probably for staff. I just want a definition for tiered interventions assistance program, or a reference document that details that out, since we're taking out all the line items underneath it. What all does that include?
Question for,
I'm so sorry. Could I ask Member Klein to repeat that?
sure.
So it replaces, I've got to pull it up here, but it replaces a whole list of things with just this one term. A whole bunch of stuff is taken out, and it's replaced with tiered interventions assistance program. And I just want to know if we have a resource document on that, or manuals, or,
We have Rhett with us. Rhett, could you introduce yourself? Thank you for joining us.
Yes. Rhett Larson, School Safety Specialist for the Utah State Board of Education. Can you tell me what lines those are on?
217?
217, yeah.
So that would be speaking more towards that multidisciplinary team approach. In looking at and supporting the school. Sorry, my thing's just scrolling a little bit slower. My apologies there. But it would just be speaking to that multidisciplinary approach, is my understanding.
so what happens with all of that, those things that have been crossed out? Are they going away, or are they just being incorporated into this new term, or this new
Yes.
program?
Yes, and it might be best to
Yes,
me
it's
just one
being
second.
enveloped. All of those things are being included within the new
If I
program
may, Rhett,
term.
yes, Ben,
I
please.
jump in and help. Chair, is that okay?
Please, yeah.
So we added new language starting on lines 185 that talks about what the team should be comprised of and what it should look like. And that's why they took that language out, was because the new language that comes before it in the rule is going to be replacing that, I believe was what we're doing there,
So
recommending there.
do we have a resource manual like the high leverage teaching practices? I find that often when things come to our rules, or for us to amend, that there are resources out there that USBE uses in the field, but they're not included in our agenda, which would be very helpful, and so that we could know what they're being sent in the field and what these things look like in practice, how they're being trained on it. That would be very helpful, and I would ask that in the future on all agenda items that there are field resources that are used, that those be also attached to in the docs on our agenda, so that we can have a fuller understanding of what it is we're actually voting on when it comes to how these things actually play out in the schools and in the classroom. Is that, can I make a motion to recommend that, or is that just something that maybe leadership could, or staff could just make note of and start
We'll
including those
certainly make note of-
resources?
a note of that, yes.
Okay,
And I, just as an information item, if there's something that as you're reading through it, that you'd like, that needs to be included, or could we get that? If you just, I would send it to the appropriate staff member, and they could probably just attach that, because we're not always foreseeing maybe something, I'm maybe speaking for staff, we're seeing something that you might find of interest that maybe others are familiar with, so.
but I
yes.
think if there are
Yeah.
resources out there that are typically used in the field, they should be included, just standard protocol, without us having to ask for it, just so that we have all the information that we need and we're not guessing what certain things mean or what they entail. I had another question, and I forgot to write down the line, but it uses the term, the term multidisciplinary teams is used several times, obviously, we talked about that, but we also talk about disciplinary actions, or disciplinary, and disciplinary process, disciplinary actions, is that, it makes me wonder, because we think of a certain thing, when we hear discipline or disciplinary, we think of like punitive, right? But then we have multidisciplinary teams, and it makes me wonder if those definitions, or the definition of disciplinary action or process, is somehow what the disciplinary teams are doing. Does that make sense? Like, are they enacting discipline? Or are they there as, I mean, because interventions are listed here, but they've, somewhere, I can't remember if it's in this rule or not, they say that interventions are not punitive, and yet there's just some language that makes me question that. So if you can help me out.
Vice Chair Hart or
No,
Deputy
go ahead.
Norman?
I was just in your absence.
Deputy Norman.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. We have Rhett that can speak specifically to what the multidisciplinary team is and the difference between that and what discipline is, and then how that's decided at the local levels and what context that is, maybe to begin to answer those questions. So, Chair, if I may have Rhett begin to answer.
Thank you, Rhett.
Thank you, Rhett Larson, School Safety Specialist. So a multidisciplinary team approach, as we look in this, and the purpose is to determine, so to give you an example, let's say a student, we've heard that a student has made a threat. The multidisciplinary team that should consist of the school administrator, school-based mental health, school resource officer, and other professionals that relate to knowing information about that student and can help provide resources and support depending on each situation or scenario. They determine if the threat is serious or not serious, what interventions need to be there to support both the student who made the threat and the school community, making sure the school community and everyone involved is safe. The school administrator always oversees discipline in the building. And so it would be, yes, to gain information and understanding from that multidisciplinary approach to determine, is the threat serious or not serious? What interventions do we need to deploy to help, again, the student who made the threat? Is it serious or not serious? What interventions do we need to play to help that individual as well as keep the school safe? And then if the threat was serious, and depending on the situation, then the administrator would be the one that would look at that disciplinary approach and deploy the disciplinary actions. But it really helps having a team to really help support in giving additional knowledge and really making that decision through that team approach, so it's not left up to one individual to make that decision. And I hope that helps. Did that answer your question?
Okay, Chair, may I? So when we talk about like line 191, use threat assessment outcomes to inform the disciplinary process. So is there somebody that has done, a student that has violated some kind of rule, and now they're trying to come up with disciplinary actions or interventions based on something that's actually happened, or just a threat? Because it says threat assessment outcomes. Are they, and in prevention and intervention, so they're looking at possible threats and then how to intervene or prevent. It sounds, I'm just going to be straight up with you, it sounds a lot like pre-crime to me from Minority Report. Like we're trying to guess when somebody's going to do something wrong, and we're going to intervene or discipline before there's any actual evidence, just a threat assessment, somebody's best guess that somebody is maybe a problem. And now we're going to implement interventions or discipline. This just gets really sketchy for me, and I can't in good conscience move in this direction. I understand that we have to try and keep our schools safe, but there's a line that moves into an unethical space where we are, prejudging people and they're taking actions on things that it's like guilty before before you've even done anything. So I have a whole lot of other questions, and so for the sake of time, I'm not going to ask them. I will make one
Member Klein,
amendment.
Deputy Norman did want to answer that question because
Okay.
it goes over into the disciplinary
Okay.
area if we want to defer to
Thank
her.
you, appreciate that question. Part of that is, it's the school, if you look on line 181, it's talking about evidence-based threat assessment, and then it's talking about determine the severity of a threat and what courses of action to take. So when we talk about the threat assessment teams, and they're determining when something, an action has happened, something, the observable, something that's been done, then they're determining the level of threat and then what to do with that threat. When we're talking about some of those other pieces that you were talking about, it's in code 53G-8, and it's in the 200s area, and it talks about the conduct and discipline policies and procedures, and then that goes into what level of behavior was exhibited or what action was taken. Some of it is already legislated, what can happen if it's a Class C misdemeanor, a Class B misdemeanor, what can be referred on, what needs an intervention that's in school, and so all of those depend on the behavior that is exhibited, and so that's where these teams come into play. They'll be able to say this action was taken or this behavior was exhibited, and then we need to say, is this something that is referred on to law enforcement? Is this something that we do to refer to JJYS? Is this something we do in the school? And that's how they start to kind of go down that process.
Okay, it doesn't really help me, because I have so many other questions, and I know we don't have time to cover them all. But again, I will mention this book again. I don't know if anybody's taken me up on the offer yet, but Why Meadow Died by Andy Pollock. He's the father of Meadow, who was killed in the Parkland, Florida school shooting, and his investigation into a lot of these policies and programs that is, in spite of their good intentions, actually had the opposite effect, and just masked the problems and didn't actually work the way they thought that they would. And now they're being implemented across the country. But anyway, and it actually makes schools less safe instead of more safe. So line 136, it references 15A-5-202.5. I looked that up and I couldn't find that piece of code anywhere, so. 15A-5-202.5 on line 136.
Excuse me, that, if I may, we have a link
Please,
to
thanks,
that in
ma'am.
the rule. It goes to the state fire code.
I'm so sorry, you said.
136. Okay.
132 in the.
It's coming up now, so good. I'm glad that that came up. It wasn't coming up for me before. So I will make just one last amendment, if that's okay, or an amendment.
Sure.
On 127. I would move to strike the words developmentally and age. Those three words, developmentally and age.
What
From
draft are you
line
working off?
127. So it's
Those words aren't in line 127 in draft.
one,
Can you tell me the draft numbers you're working on, Mr. Combs?
Draft 4 is the committee motion.
on the right
Right.
one. That's four. Yeah, so
Draft 4.
Action item 9, right?
developmentally and age appropriate is the full. 128, sorry. Is it 128?
127.
What?
It's 127 and 128, they're split.
Okay. Okay, yes, so 127 and 128, I would just move to strike developmentally, developmentally and age, so that it would read, students and adults to receive age-appropriate emergency, not age-appropriate, but appropriate, to receive appropriate emergency preparedness training. It's 127 and 128, yes. And it would take out developmentally and age. Leave in appropriate. Don't strike appropriate. Well, okay,
Staff wants to speak. to
sorry.
that, but sure.
There's two appropriates. Take out the developmentally appropriate, and then the word and that follows, and age.
Oh.
Developmentally appropriate and is and age, sorry. So it will read, it will just go from receive to appropriate emergency preparedness training. Okay,
Other discussion to that?
Yeah,
Did we
I-
get a second to that? Sorry. Let's see if we have a second. Do we have it teed up on the screen, Member Klein? Is that like what you're after?
developmentally appropriate and age. So, and the and would be stricken also. Yeah, so put the, yeah, just take that quote out and put it after age. Yep, developmentally appropriate and age, correct.
Okay. Do we have a second to that motion? No second? Okay.
So, sir, I would second it. Because I really want to
Okay.
understand why. I guess I don't know whether I want to second it or not, because I don't understand the reasoning behind it.
You don't have to explain your second. You can throw it out there and then we can discuss. So having seconded, back to Member Klein to
Okay.
discuss.
So I'm looking at the different things that it is talking about training them on, including rescue techniques, first aid, safety measures appropriate for specific emergencies and other emergency skills. You either learn the skill or you don't. There really isn't age appropriate or developmentally. And I had another question on that as well, like who determines developmentally appropriate for any given child?
That seems like a reasonable question. Is that to Superintendent Norman or Vice Chair
Yes.
Hart want to address that? What?
Well, I just wanted, I don't support it, and this is why. There are students in our schools who are, their age is not their developmental level, and I am not comfortable, for instance, in a severe and profound class, I do not want the responsibility of trying to teach some of those. It's just not,
But they're gonna teach it anyway,
No.
based on how this is written.
not if it has to be taught developmentally appropriate.
How do you, so just a question, if I may.
Sure.
CPR, how do you teach that in different ways for different levels of development?
For example,
Like-
I would teach, okay,
It's like you
I
either
would give an example, but I
know
think.
CPR or you don't.
Well, but there's things that an emergency, like a student would know when this happens, alert a teacher immediately. So you wouldn't be teaching the CPR, but you would be teaching an appropriate response to an emergency. We want to equip all of our students, but sometimes it really truly has to be developmentally.
So
could we put-
appropriate doesn't cover that just by itself?
Could we put this to, I think Deputy Norman and Director Rasmussen are willing to weigh in?
If I may, this language comes because legislation told us to use this language, and we can, Mr. Rhett Larson can speak to that more. This
Rhett?
came specifically from HB 140 from the sounds of it.
Director Larson?
Yes, Rhett Larson, School Safety Specialist. And we were asked in House Bill 140 from Senator Johnson to define developmentally appropriate. And let me give an example. If there was an active shooter training, that can look differently depending on the age. For example, there are situations that we've heard of in the United States. I haven't heard it specifically in Utah, but where you have individuals like an administrator dress up as the active shooter and will even go into like a kindergarten age classroom. And so we want to make sure that our drills are developmentally appropriate. And so we were asked in statute to define it, but also that gives you an example to help support that.
Sure. I'm sorry,
Member
Chair.
Klein,
so that's not
follow up?
something we're doing, right?
So Chair, may I follow? Yeah.
Deputy Norman?
Yeah, I just for clarification, that's red is showing what a bad example is, which we're trying to make sure doesn't happen in the state of Utah. And I might also call to your attention on line 24 on draft 4, it does state the definition of developmentally appropriate means adapted to what a student is able to do chronologically, cognitively, physically, or emotionally.
Member Klein, follow up?
We can go ahead and vote.
Okay. All right, any other lights? Chair Hymas, or you, that was just for coming back to you? Okay. Yes, the motion is Member Klein's motion to amend to strike developmentally appropriate and age from lines 127 to 128. Seeing no lights, Member Wood,
No.
Member Straight,
No.
Member Reel,
No.
Member Norton,
No.
Member Lear, Member Carey, Member Hymas,
No.
Vice Chair Hart,
No.
Member Green, Vice Chair Earl,
No.
Member Davis,
No.
Member Klein,
Yes.
Member Booth,
No.
Member Bogus. No. And I am a yes.
I do have one more amendment.
Let's see. Actually, I was a no. I'm sorry. I got myself backwards. I'm a no on that one. Member Carey, I think, was voting through me. Okay. Back to, sorry? All right.
Right, don't let it.
Back to Member Carey or Member Straight? Hymas. Sure.
Oh, yeah. Everyone knows what today is, right?
I think I know where you're
Yeah.
going with this.
Okay.
Go for it.
I can't do Yoda. Anyway, may the 4th be with you.
Thank you, Member Straight. I actually thought you might say that he looked a bit like a Force ghost with the filter he's got going on there. My kids might say that. All right. Don't tell my kids I even tried that joke. All right, let's see. Back to Chair. No, we have
We have an
amendment
underlying
to-
motion on the floor.
Amendment that failed.
Yeah,
so
I
go
I
ahead.
have another motion.
Okay.
On line 192, to strike involve parents in intervention process and replace it with get informed parental consent before implementing any interventions.
What were those lines again, Member Klein?
192,
92.
that would include tier 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, do we have it framed up
Let's see.
accurately?
Get informed parental consent before implementing any adventure. Strike, involve parents in intervention process.
Okay.
Actually,
Do we have a
add
second, or, oh, go ahead.
written before informed. Written, informed parental consent. That's it.
Okay, do we have a second? No second on that one. Okay, we are back to the underlying motion from from the committee.
I have one more.
Okay.
And this is, so on line 203, talks about school safety specialist trainings that the superintendent will provide. I would move to have all trainings approved by the board before they are used in the field. Reviewed and approved. All trainings. Or all school safety specialist trainings will be more explicit.
That cover it?
All school safety trainings, plural?
So we would say, school safety, that's the rule writing way you would say that. You don't use the plural, you use the singular. in the
Okay.
Does that have the
writing.
same effect, though?
Yes, it still
Okay.
means
So
any
A means any,
training.
and therefore all, okay.
Before, I don't know, can you duck your head? Thank you. Shall be reviewed and approved by the board before the superintendent provides the training to the field. Yes.
Okay. Did we get a second on that?
Gosh. I was reviewing something else. I would second that.
Okay. Member Klein, have you spoken to it, or would you like to speak further to the
I think it's self-explanatory.
motion? Okay, any discussion of that? I see a light from Member Norton.
I just have a clarifying question. Up on the one that is blue, where it says a school safety training shall be reviewed. Hang on just a second.
You're in the right place.
Okay, well, I was even going to go up one more before that. Are we also discussing the get written informed
No,
parental?
there was no second. on
That was,
failed.
okay. On this school safety training shall be reviewed and approved by the board. There's a lot of school safety trainings that happen, even, from code. Are those subject to this as well? Or is this just done on an LEA level, or where?
Is that a question for
Yeah, that's a
Rhett?
question for the,
Would that
for-
go to
for Rhett, yep.
or Specialist Larson?
Route Larson, school safety specialist. So how I interpret, and please correct me, but that motion would be any training that we provide. And even in statute, threat assessments required, standard response protocol is required. And we do provide, ongoing training. We continue to learn with and from other states on best practices. For example, threat assessment, the U.S. Secret Service says the number one thing schools can do to prevent targeted school violence is to implement threat assessment. So we continue to learn with and from other states to look at evidence-based procedures. And we continue to work collectively together with internal and external stakeholders on what's best for school safety. And so this could be, I would want further direction as to what this would look like. So for example, if we provided, a school safety conference, would all of the keynotes and breakouts have to be approved by the board as well? Because that would be considered school safety training. Would stop the bleed, CPR, all of those, would they need to be, because that would be part of school safety training. And so to me, that's really broad. And so I would need further direction as to what that looks like so that I could properly execute that part of my position.
Did that answer the question, Chair Norton? Member Norton? Let me just interject one quick question. What's the current oversight then, if it's not board?
I'm
like
sorry.
Cutting you off? Sorry.
No, I'm just realizing that there was part left out, and maybe that would help. It says, it was supposed to say, the school safety specialist training. Does that help?
Do you want me to answer that? Is that to me, Chair?
Yes.
I think so, yes.
Okay, so Rhett Larson, school safety specialist. So that speaks to the portion of both the board-supported business case, when we talked about the School Safety Academy having school safety specialists in every school, which is part of House Bill 61 that was passed. That school safety training for school safety specialists would look at that statute for threat assessment training, that standard response protocol training. It even talks about, for example, there is law enforcement training that we have to make available to all educators. So we look to, national best standards and practices, which also House Bill 61 tells us to do. So for example, we have provided trainings from the National Association of School Resource Officers and extended that invitation to school administrators. And so we, even since 2019, when the School Safety Center has been, established for the Utah State Board of Education, we always follow statute. The trainings we have provided have been threat assessment training or training for what you do during drills. So we're very mindful of what is provided and following what's in statute. I hope that answers the question.
Answer the question. Member Klein, that was from Member Klein, right? Partly my question was, if it's not brought before the board, I think, what is the review and approval for safety specialist training? Does that come from you or from somebody else, Rhett?
So Chair Rhett Larson, School Safety Specialist. So that it's within the School Safety Center. We have liaisons. We have specialists in the Utah State Board of Education, liaisons from the Department of Public Safety, liaison from the Office of Substance Use and Mental Health, and as well as a specialist from Safe UT. The leaders of those organizations, so we have members of each of those specialists that work. We also have the School Safety Collaborative. And so any training that we do is definitely brought before that larger audience and making sure that we continue to implement, what is best practices for school safety. We make sure that we're aligned with what are best practices. And so that's how we have, that's how we have provided training, but everything that we've provided has gone back to statute. The majority of the trainings we have provided is threat assessment and training from the I Love You Guys Foundation on standard response protocol. But again, it's the School Safety Center that has that ongoing conversation. And then we have that School Safety Collaborative as well. And I'm one, since I've been hired, I always run things by my leadership.
Got it. Thank you. Okay. Any further questions? Let's vote then if we don't have any more. So the motion is to amend on line 203, a school safety specialist training shall be reviewed and approved by the board before the superintendent provides the training to the field. Member Wood?
No.
Member Straight?
No.
Member Reel?
No.
Member Norton?
No.
Member Lear? Yes. Member Hymas? No. Vice Chair Hart? Is it Vice Chair Hart? Is she gone? Okay. Member Lear is a no. Okay. Definite no. And Member Green? No. Member Vice Chair Earl?
No.
Member Davis?
How's that?
Member Davis? Member Klein?
Yes.
Member Booth?
No.
Member Bogus?
Yes.
And Member Moss is a no. I think that motion fails. Okay, so we are back to the underlying motion, which is that the board approves R 277-400 School Facility Emergency and Safety Amendment Draft 4.
Sir, I would
on
like to ask
second
a
and
question.
final reading.
May I ask a question and maybe
Yes.
perhaps make a motion? I'm so sorry. I do believe my question is directed to, his name disappeared, the gentleman on
Larson?
Zoom. Yes.
Safety specialist.
I am wondering, Mr. Larson, if you look in lines 184, clear down to 208, there's some language there. And if you look at the number 1, it says that the school shall implement an evidence-based assessment. And then in line 192, you use the word intervention, and I'm struggling to reconcile those two words right now. Could you help me understand that better, please?
This is line 192, is that?
So, yes, specifically in line 192, it says involve parents in the intervention process, but up top, it's talking about an assessment process. And I'm not reconciling those two, and I'm just wondering what I'm missing in that.
Can you address that, Rhett?
Yes, thank you. So Rhett Larson, School Safety Specialist. So where it's talking about that assessment, I believe you said 185, which is the evidence-based threat assessment. So just to give some clarity, threat assessment It's a problem-solving approach to violence prevention that involves assessment and intervention with students who have threatened violence in some way. And so when the multidisciplinary team works together to conduct a threat assessment to determine if a threat is serious or not serious, and they go through that threat assessment process, depending on the situation, and the reason why I say that without giving specifics is because that could look differently depending on each scenario, every threat that's brought forward. But when interventions take place, they want to involve the parents within that intervention process. And what they have found with threat assessment is not only evidence to keep schools safe, but evidence of also helping support students through a holistic approach, including the student who has threatened, especially those who may have not done serious threats, and looking at what interventions do we need to implement here to help support this student who has made this, this not so serious threat. What supports do they need? But even a student who has made a serious threat, and interventions need to be, carried out or implemented. I think it's great to want to involve the parents through that process. So that way there's more support for the student and the school and making sure everything's done appropriately.
Chair, can I?
Thank
follow
you.
up
Director
briefly?
Rasmussen?
Thank you. Just to point out on line 50, it has a definition for threat assessment that includes, that points out that intervention is part of that strategy and threat assessment is defined there.
Okay, thank you.
May I make an
Ambassador.
amendment, sir?
Sure.
I would move that on line 192, that we involve parents in the intervention process, subject to expressed written parental consent.
I just want a point of order clarity. We already voted on this.
I was going to ask, what was the prior, can we read the prior motion that was,
It died without a second.
Okay.
is that the one that
Just
died
wanted
without a
to check.
second? Okay. Slightly different. It wasn't voted on
So
previously, so
it
go ahead.
it is
yeah.
different, and it is different for two reasons. One is, it says, each K-12 public school shall utilize a whatever, I can't speak, it's too late, that may, and then it says they don't have to involve parents. But I would say that interventions should not be taking place with kids without express written parental consent. I mean, we're talking about high-level stuff here, and we're not involving parents in the process before we move to intervene with their child. Maybe I'm misunderstanding here, and if I am, then I'm happy, sir, Mr. Larson, if you correct me, but I just don't think we should be running an intervention without express written parental consent. And I mean the intervention, not the teaching of certain things. I mean, if we teach kids CPR, that's great, but if we're running an intervention protocol, I think we need express written parental consent. Can you help me understand that better?
So before we put it to him, let's just see if it's in order, or whether it's the same as the prior motion. I guess parliamentarians, because,
Add the new language.
okay, so it's different, and the prior, okay, is there a second? Second, okay, so then we've got a question to direct to Rhett.
I would say subject to, that interventions are subject to.
So you want-
Am
what do you want,
am I
sir?
reading this incorrectly, or just, am I not seeing what?
I'm not sure I understand. So you want that before involve parent? Subject?
That
So involve parents in the intervention process is the current language. You've got
Subject to express.
subject to
What line, do you know what line we're on?
192.
Subject to expressed, written, informed parental consent, or whatever, I can't even read. Could you put that up just a little farther? I guess maybe my problem is I'm trying to read through the chair's head. And I'm just not doing a very good job of it. Subject to expressed.
Yes, yeah.
Let's let Member Bogus see if you've got your language framed up correctly.
No,
Yeah.
it's not framed up correctly. So I think what I would like it to say is subject to expressed, written, informed parental consent involve parents in an intervention process.
In a way that reflects your intent and then Norman wants to weigh in.
Yes, I maybe this might be helpful. This threat assessment that we're talking about, you saw evidence of it this morning when we had the officers this morning that Board Member Carey brought in. And so that was conducting a threat assessment. What happens? Someone called in, then all of a sudden it happened, and then they went through their threat assessment process. They determined, did this happen, did this happen, did this happen? Not always does it involve a parent. For example, if it's a school-wide data problem, they're looking at entryways, exits, they're looking at the capacity of a building, they're looking at all of those things. So not always does it require a parent in here, or is it just involving a student? So I don't know if that needs to be a clarification with your in your amendment. And so it starts out by saying may in the very beginning, and then this is then it's also saying subject to written, express written informed parental consent. And so I'm trying to determine what the interplay of those would be.
Well, I think what the interplay is that if this is a may, so for all of these things we discuss, you don't necessarily need to involve parents in that because you're running through the process. But if a student brings a weapon to school and the district is going to run an intervention based upon that behavior, parents need to be informed and consent to that intervention.
I will for sure.
And maybe
Just-
I'm misunderstanding.
yeah.
If I am, then I do
No,
want to
I apologize.
understand.
Yeah.
Deputy Norman, go ahead.
I've been on many of these meetings and working with DPS and what that looks like. And so I'm trying to make sure that what is written will actually be actionable, that it can happen. So whatever is voted on. So in looking at that, one of the things in talking with DPS, the Department of Public Safety, is if there's something in time, there's an active shooter in the building, and the intervention is to stop the active shooter. The active shooter is a student. They are not going to be able to get express written parental consent from the parent to be able to provide that intervention. So I think it's very specific to whatever the behavior being exhibited is. So if we place an overarching context behind all, then I think that's where there might be a little bit of conflict in real time when something is happening. Do they need to call a student's parents if? Does that make sense? And so that might then conflict with some of the law enforcement laws.
So could I follow up, Chair?
Sure. And
So
we got Member Klein next.
correct me if I'm wrong, but to me, that is not what you just described would not be a standard intervention, if you will. That would be a law enforcement action subject to an elevated episode. And again, I want to understand if I'm wrong, but to me, that wouldn't be a standard intervention within the realm of, well, like my example, and I think I took my example from Mr. Larson, is a student brings a weapon to school and an intervention is run. That's very different than, and obviously law enforcement is called, right? But that also elevates you outside of a standard intervention protocol because law enforcement has been called. I'm thinking a standard school-based intervention, for example, we are going to send this kid to a counselor. That should be subject to express written parental consent. And that is my concern. The law
Yeah.
enforcement thing elevates it. And to me, those are two different.
So I'm
Deputy Norman, yes, thanks.
Thanks, sorry.
And thank you for helping me
Yes,
understand.
I so appreciate your clarification, because then within this, it hasn't been specified in any way what level of offense in this that a parent would need to be called, or one that would be not need to be called. For example, is it a Class B misdemeanor? Is it about violence? Is it about a weapons threat? Is it about, so those things might need to be differentiated along the way to be able to say, this is a level that if it engaged here would involve a parent, but this is one that it would not. If it's something in school, teasing, that type of thing, then of course you get with the parent first. But if it's a certain level of offense, then it would not. And I think that's part of the determination I'm trying to make.
Is there an attorney here that could ask us what level of offense would invoke the action of law enforcement? And maybe that's too
Brett.
broad of a question.
Rhett?
Rhett Larson, School Safety Specialist. No response that she said my name, but I'm not. She asked for legal opinion, and I'm not an attorney. But I will just echo, what Deputy Superintendent Patty Norman said. with that intervention piece, and really intervention could look, there's a lot of ways that could look depending on the situation that that multidisciplinary team is faced with. But also I would question if you had a student that, for example, was in, let's say in a facility and attending school, and they made a threat, and the school wants to make interventions, like what does that look like? And so just wanting to make sure I get further understanding as well. But then again, to her specific question, I think she asked for a legal opinion.
Okay. Any follow-up, or Director Rasmussen?
Can I just follow up on that?
Yeah.
So law enforcement can get involved to investigate any crime, but the other thing law enforcement would be involved in is schools all have agreements with their SRO that would vary depending on what they've agreed with the agency to have the SRO do. So that may look different at each different LEA, each different school.
So follow-up, Member Bogus, is there a distinction you're trying to make? Or Member Lear, let's take it over to Member Lear.
Well, can I think for just a minute?
They're getting mad at me over here, but I think we're tying the hands of school people. We don't have a definition of intervention in this rule, which is interesting, Rhett. I don't know if there should be or could be or what, but my understanding of interventions, when I taught at Kearns High School, was grabbing the arm of a football player who was going to slug another kid. And that was an intervention. And I wasn't about ready to get parental consent. Expressly provided
Yeah, I
parental
agree.
consent. And
I
so
agree.
that's an intervention in my mind. And that's kind of more the direction, as I understand it, that juvenile justice is moving. So expecting this in a split second isn't realistic, and unless we want to get highly detailed and define interventions and put the levels what levels they mean, then I think we leave it alone.
Superintendent Dixon would like to ask a question.
Chair Moss, may I ask a question of Member
Yes.
Bogus? Member Bogus, I'm just trying to frame, I think I'm hearing your concern is that like there are short-term interventions as have been mentioned. I'm trying to reflect back on my 42 years of interventions. And so there are some short-term that we've been talking about in this space of safety.
Yes.
And then there are some long-term that are more behavioral plans.
Yes.
And I'm trying to differentiate, is that more where you're leaning, if there's some kind of plan that involves, whether it's social workers or SROs or maybe everyone, where there's more of a long-term plan that involves family, that's where the parent then would sign off. Am I separating those correctly, the way you're speaking to them?
Yes, I agree with Member Lear. You know, there are, I would call it a response and not an intervention, but that would be my language. But yes, there are times you just react in the moment. You don't get parental consent for that because it has to be done, right? But you are correct in that long-term intervention process that involves social workers and counselors and all of those things. Parents do need to not just be involved, they need to expressly consent to that intervention.
Okay.
That is my concern. And maybe my motion, I don't know, maybe it could be a substitute motion to send this back for clarification of specifically those two issues so that we know what we're responding to in real time and what is the long-term thing. Or perhaps we could change that word and subject it to parental consent. What do you think, Superintendent?
So if I may, Chair Moss?
Please.
Because this is a time-sensitive rule that our schools are really depending on to put plans in place, safety plans in place, I'm wondering, and this is just thinking aloud here, I'm wondering if it could say, add in the piece of any long-term interventions or behavioral intervention plans. Behavioral intervention plans is the way I hear you describing it, that's what I'm thinking more of.
Yes, could we use that language and maybe, and I'm asking, and maybe Mr. Rasmussen or Director Rasmussen or Superintendent Stallings could help me here, but what if we moved to amend line 192 that we involve parents following the suppression of an imminent threat and prior to engaging in long-term intervention, gain express written parental consent.
I would suggest perhaps adding that at the end of the list, because the the list that we're dealing with, and I'm sorry, Chair, if I may.
Please.
The list we're dealing with are all optional things that the threat assessment team, that they may look at doing. So if we want to have I'm thinking I'm putting some language up here that we might look at adding at the end as just kind of mandatory language for that, just for long-term interventions that they have to obtain the express written consent if they're doing a long-term intervention with a student.
And I'm super thankful for that. May I? I'm so sorry.
Please.
And so then I would just reframe my motion to say, on line 192, involve parents following the suppression of an imminent threat. No, well, again, you know, I don't know, but I think we need to contact them following that. And then I'm thankful that Superintendent Dixon was able to bring my thoughts into clarity. Thank you.
If I could ask one question, how would this change current practice for long-term behavioral interventions? What do schools currently do in that realm that would require specific parental consent under this amendment? What kind of things would this now require explicit parental consent if you're doing a more, no immediate threat but long-term intervention? What do they do now that would now require this?
I can begin to answer that in red if I don't answer it completely, if you could. So right now we have IEPs, individualized educational plans. We also have 504s. We also, with the passing of Representative Lisenbede's Bill 304, we have the reintegration plans now when it comes to threats of violence or when there's weapons involved. And that's why I explicitly was asking that piece. And parents are explicitly called out in the creation of that plan as a stakeholder group that needs to be in there. So
those are areas where parents are already required to be involved, although an IEP is not necessarily a veto for parents, right? So what things would there be? I mean, that's a discussion with parents. What things might be done now as a behavioral intervention outside of the IEP or 504 that might be done now without specific parental consent and would now be required to have parental consent if that was passed?
Is that question to me?
It's to
If
the
you can
universe,
answer
so
Yeah, we're
yeah,
looking
Brad,
for we're looking for a special education team so they can give you the exact things that would come from the LRBI manual that you just passed recently.
Would this only apply to special ed students, or okay, so presumably there are interventions that might be conducted currently, and I'm just curious how broadly this would affect the ability to intervene. At what point, assuming it's outside of the immediate threat, has now dissipated, right? That then puts you in a pretty broad world of intervention, and I'm just curious what that would now affect in terms of the ability to take intervention outside of the immediate threat. Where would you now need, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
I don't mean to hold us up. I'm just curious how broad of an effect this might have. Cindy, do you have a hand up? Oh, Cindy and Randy. Okay, sorry, we're hearing both online. Member Booth and Member Davis?
No.
Randy took it down?
I guess so.
Member Davis?
Yeah, Randy first. Yeah, I think that this is something really that schools are already doing. And then once we then add it into our board rule, then we start adding more and more reporting requirements and assurances and such. And I just think because they're doing it already and there are already a bunch of requirements, I would probably not vote for this at this time. And I'd like to call the question if there is no one left to speak.
So there is someone left to speak. Calling the question would require
Unless
unless. Okay.
there is no one
All
left
right,
to
so you don't want to do got it. Back to Member Klein then.
Yeah, this is a very broad thing that is already being practiced on a wide scale in our schools and being implemented more and more. In fact, that's what the system is doing. Instead of academic remediation, it's like whether it's psychological or behavioral or academic, everything is now based around intervention, supports and interventions and prevention. So, and it affects all students. had brief conversations about this before, the tier 1 being everybody gets the intervention. Tier 2 is a higher level. The tier 3 is, it's like a pyramid. All in the literature, all of the examples are a pyramid, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And currently, those, the higher tiers may talk to parents, they may not. There's no requirement. Those prevention level, tier 1, are happening. Students don't even know it's happening. Parents don't know it's happening. And it is on that psychological and behavioral level where it's about changing mindsets. When we talk about growth mindset, it's referring to these intervention systems that are widespread, SEL, PBIS, MTSS, RTI, LRBI, IEPs, and 504s. Every student is in this system of interventions at some level or another. No one can escape it. It's because the whole system has been now built around that. And so when you have interventions being done around psychological and behavioral, where we're trying to affect mindsets, values, attitudes, beliefs, dispositions, that is what this is about. And that's why we need, parents should be giving explicit written, informed consent for this to happen, because it is all about that. They use it for academics, but it's also used for all of these more subjective areas, which I have said many times is not the role of schools, which schools are taking that as their role. The whole child initiatives are all about all of those other areas outside of academics. And that is what we're talking about, and that is happening without written informed parental consent. Parents have no idea it's happening, but it's happening every day for all students.
Okay, I think we've got Member Straight, but Deputy Norman, did you want to respond to Member Klein?
Mine was in response to your beginning question.
Oh, briefly perhaps. I don't want to
Yeah.
get us hung up, but thank you if you've got
Very briefly, as I mentioned, the LRBI manual that this board passed recently, if you look in the very beginning with how it aligns to statute and rule, each one of them, for example, it would say Utah Code 53A 11-910, and then it talks about disruptive student behavior, and then next to it, it will tell you which sections in the LRBI, and it talks about comprehensive plans, how it's done, who's in on that meeting, consequences for the conduct. So each one of these, and that's why context matters about what is the behavior that's being exhibited according to what type of support or intervention will be happening, or what happens now, I think was your more direct question. Like, what are we currently doing now? It depends on the behavior exhibited and who exhibits the behavior. All of that is spelled out in the LRBI manual.
And does that sometimes include parents then?
Absolutely.
Depending on the level, and this is in the LRBI?
Yeah.
So just a point of
Thank you.
clarification.
Sure, and then we go to Member Straight.
I'm sorry, for Superintendent Norton? No. Norman. My apologies. So if I recall correctly, the LRBI is a reference manual. It's not required that they use that.
Chair, may I?
Yes, please.
Yes, it's not required. So what I was referencing was pages, like in the first few pages, it talks about what's in code, what's in rule, the content, and then what can be done as a model policy, a model practice, those types of things. And then it would be up to the individual schools, local context within their discipline programs, or what they have is their intervention program. So there's some local context as well. So it gives those samples along the way, what's required, what we have, models, and then what the school decides.
Thank you. Member Straight?
I'd like to stay in line for when we go to the underlying motion.
Let's see, okay. So the motion is to amend line 192 to read, involve parents, let me make sure I got this right. Involve parents after the suppression of an imminent threat, and then also the italicized language. An LEA shall obtain express, written, informed parental consent prior to implementing long-term intervention with a student.
Yeah, may I
Okay.
speak to that very, just super briefly?
Sure.
I know. So, I just think that, for example, if something were to happen on the street, the law enforcement can't interview a student without a parent present, or a youth, a juvenile. So I think that we have to offer that same,
Hold on, let's,
that same element inside our schools. And I understand that the definition of an intervention may be nebulous at this point, but that's just standing practice, and it should be something that the board honors and upholds for parents and students in this state.
thank you. Vice Chair Earl?
Yeah, as I'm listening to the discussion, I just have to keep thinking, we're talking about school threat assessment. So these are direct threats. I believe we have provisions with the others. So anyways, while I understand and I support this idea that we've got to make sure we're contacting parents if we're doing long-term interventions, that kind of thing, these are threat assessments. These are immediate actions you've got to take place. And I think almost all have a mechanism for informing parents after something's been de-escalated or whatever the situation is. I don't want to, I feel like we maybe are overcomplicating things. So anyways.
I think any further discussion? I'll just say I kind of share that sentiment, but I don't know if this is the spot to address it, and the longer term intervention seems fairly broad, and there may be another place to address that in my view. So that's just my take, but I don't think that we have any further lights unless Member Klein was, you're still on, or?
I just keep
Okay.
wondering what our definition of threat is, because it could be used in a lot of different ways by different people. And I don't know that we have a definition anywhere, do we?
Of threat within the context of this rule, threat assessment, is there I think
We have a definition of active
Yes.
threat. Does that help? Active threat is on line 19, means any incident which creates an immediate threat or imminent danger to the school campus, community, facilities, and transportation systems.
Okay. All right, board members, let's vote. The motion is framed up on the screen.
Only that first paragraph, I'm not sure.
My understanding is it's included as the italicized, this was,
She didn't make that language.
So my understanding
that
was
right?
that, maybe I misheard you, but that putting that Claire at the end,
let's make sure we framed it up then. So, Member Bogus, that,
yes, I would like 192 to read imminent threat. But then, it was my understanding, and I'm sorry if I misheard you, Director Rasmussen, that after the small 5 there, the Roman numeral 5, that there would be language incorporated to obtain parental consent. And maybe just strike the words long-term, just intervention, period.
so,
And that way, we're being very clear that we're suppressing imminent threats and that we are honoring the law in terms of parental consent previous to an intervention. And that way, those are very
okay,
specific.
there we go. All right, so two pieces, one in line 192 and then one following 193. Right? And did we have a second? I just want to make sure. We've just had some debate. I think we seconded it. This consistent with how you understood it? Okay. All right, so board members, please vote. Member Wood?
No.
Member Straight?
No.
Member Reel?
Nope.
Member Norton?
No.
Member Lear?
No.
Member Hymus? Vice Chair Hart?
No.
Member Green? All right, we'll come back. Vice Chair Earl? No. Member Davis?
No.
Member Klein?
Yes.
Member Booth?
No.
Member Bogus? Member Bogus and Member Green, it's down to you.
Yes.
And Member Green?
I would like it all just sent back for clarification.
Well, we're
But
voting now
I
on
know,
the
no,
motion as,
no.
And I'm a no. Okay, so that motion fails. Back to the underlying motion then, I believe, which is that the board approves R277-400, school facility and emergency and safety amendment draft 4.
I'd like to make a
On
motion.
second and final reading. And I had a
Motion
light
to
or a hand
substitute.
from, well, let's see, I've got member Straight and then member Green.
Previous question.
So previous question's been called, requires a second and 2/3 vote. There's the second. Members, please vote. We're then moving on. Previous question, which means whether to go straight to a vote on the motion framed up and highlighted. So member Bogus. No. Member Booth.
Yes.
Member Klein. No. Member Davis.
Yes.
Vice Chair Earl.
Yes.
Member Green.
No.
Vice Chair Hart.
Yes.
Member Hymus.
Yes.
Member Lear.
Yes.
Member Norton.
Yes.
Member Reel.
Yes.
Member Straight.
Yes.
Member Wood.
Yes.
And Member Moss is a yes. Requires 10. Does that pass? That passes, so we are now on. Question's been called. Without further debate, we're voting on the motion that the board approves R277-400, School Facility Emergency and Safety Amendment, Draft 4 on second and final reading. Member Wood.
Yes.
Member Straight.
Yes.
Member Reel.
Yes.
Member Norton.
Yes.
Member Lear.
Yes.
Member Hymus.
Yes.
Vice Chair Hart.
No.
Member Green.
No.
Vice Chair Earl.
Yes.
Member Davis.
Yes.
Member Klein.
No.
Member Booth.
Yes.
Member Bogus.
No.
And I'm a yes. That motion, I believe, passes, which takes us back to Chair Hymus.
Thank you. Agenda item 11.8, R277-403, School Safety Pilot Program. This is a repeal. A little background on this. It says, due to the passage of 2023 HB 140, staff recommends amendments to R277-400, which we just discussed to address school safety measures. And so now we are repealing 403. So the motion for the board is that the committee moves that the board repeal R277-403, School Safety Pilot Program on second and final reading.
Okay, any discussion of that motion? I've got lights from Member Straight, Vice Chair Hart. Either of those relevant to this? Vice Chair Hart, no? Okay. Member Bogus?
No, I
Nope.
just was gonna vote.
Okay,
Usually I'm
let's
first.
vote. Member Bogus.
Yes.
Member Booth.
Yes.
Member Klein.
Yes.
Member Davis.
Yes.
Vice Chair Earl.
Yes.
Member Green.
Yes.
Vice Chair Hart.
Yes.
Member Hymus.
Yes.
Member Lear.
Yes.
Member Norton.
Yes.
Member Reel.
Yes.
Member Straight.
Yes.
Member Wood.
Yes.
And Member Moss is a yes. That passes. Back to Chair Hymus.
Agenda item 11.9, R277-622, School-Based Mental Health Qualifying Grant Program. This is an amendment. The motion for the board is that the committee moves that the board approve R277-622, School-Based Mental Health Qualifying Grant Program, Draft 1 on second and final reading.
Any discussion on that motion? Member Lear?
No. No discussion. I'm sorry, I just had my.
Okay. Member Wood, or Member Klein, was that discussion of this motion?
Yes, I just had a question about, I think it's line 34 or 35, where it says confidentiality, and I'm just wondering what is meant by confidentiality in that specific circumstance.
Do we know who might answer that question?
Ben is taking a look.
Member Klein, what line was it again?
I think it's 35, let's see,
Line 34 is confidentiality.
7.9.
Are Tiana McCall or Katie Chalice online? Tiana, it looks, Tiana's on.
Tiana, thank you for joining us.
Hi. Tiana McCall, the school-based mental health specialist with the Safe and Healthy Schools team. Confidentiality, I guess we could strengthen the language to say protecting student confidentiality. That was our intent with that language.
Okay, so follow up.
Yes.
We have a lot of issues in our schools right now with, or around the country, of information being withheld from parents about their students. And it sounds to me like from your explanation that that's what this means, confidentiality of students. And that concerns me because I don't think that anything about a student should be kept confidential from the student's parents.
So is that a question back to Tiana? Or
I don't know if they'd like to
a
say
comment?
anything,
You don't
or
need-
is that what it means?
More of a comment, but Tiana, do you have any response to that concern?
I would just say, we're not necessarily saying keeping confidences from parents, but keeping confidential information and not sharing it unless necessary with other staff members or with other children. It's not implying that we keep information from parents.
Okay, can I ask a specific example? If a student said that they were transitioning from one gender to another, is that something that the behavioral health support personnel would keep confidential from parents? That law passed.
Point of order, yeah, it's Weiler.
Weiler's, yeah.
Senate Weiler, yeah.
Okay, so they would be trained on that, according to this, that they have to talk to parents. Okay. Trauma-informed practices is first on that list. I think probably line 23, 25. What does that look like in practice? What is that?
Tiana? That question?
So I believe it's, trying to see, we do have a definition for trauma-informed care. I can read it if you'd like, but it would just be in line with that. We do have a trauma-informed practices training offered by USBE that LEAs could choose to have as the required training, but I know a lot of LEAs also provide their own training that they've created in-house. So it would be up to the LEA to determine what they would cover in the trauma-informed training.
Superintendent Dixon has a light on too.
Yeah, if I
Go
may
ahead.
attempt to answer Board Member Klein's question, I think just in a real short summary statement, it's trauma-informed practice is understanding how trauma impacts the brain and learning. And so when our behavioral specialists or teachers, when people understand that, then they might be more understanding of the things they say and the way they interact with students. So I know that Dr. Norman has done a lot of training and research on this area, as have members of her staff, and they can go in depth if you want to talk to her offline. But in sum, it's just really understanding how trauma can impact the brain and learning, and that includes behavior.
Is there any, may I? Is there any law, state code or rules that require behavioral health support personnel to get parental consent before meeting with students or training students, going into classrooms and training students on these things?
By these things, do you mean trauma-informed practices?
list
from-
of
all
things
of
that
the list,
they're
A
trained on.
through Fundamentals of behavior, data collection, that whole list.
Yes, all of those.
Conflict
Mhm.
management. Anybody able to address that one? It's fairly compounded, going through all 7 or 8, right, as to whether.
Chair Moss?
Yes.
Yeah, just to be clear, that, and again, Tiana's the content expert, and I certainly didn't write the rule, but just referring back to the language, these are not things going in and being taught to students. These are, if you look at line 24, it's the behavioral health support personnel are trained in a 3-year cycle on these things, like how to de-escalate, looking at the things that are in the LRBI manual, training them on fundamentals of behavior, data collection. All of that is helping support the behavior specialists,
Yes, so-
not student training.
So maybe this was a slightly different question, not specific to these lines, but in reading our USBE manuals, they encourage the school health or mental health counselors and social workers, and I would put these in that same category, the behavioral health support personnel, to be spending so much of their time, they have to log their time and how they've spent it in the classroom teaching classes. Are they getting parental consent? Is there anything in our code or our rules that requires them to get written informed consent from parents before they go into the classrooms to teach these kids?
Is that for Tiana or?
Probably Tiana or Dr. Norman. I don't know that they're called on to teach classes, but I'll leave that because they're not a certified teacher.
Well, whether it's
So I'll leave that to Dr. Norman or Tiana.
Yeah, I can chime in here as well. So my understanding again is that they're not with students. And so when we're looking at that, what line were you referring to?
What are they, who are they working with then, if not students? I look at this and I say these are the personnel that are helping to implement the interventions that we were talking about. If they're doing that, what are they doing at the school?
Chair, may I?
Chair, may I?
Yes, please, either.
Tiana.
So
Tiana,
HB
thanks.
411 defined the behavioral health support personnel and some of the tasks that they are required to do under that House bill. But it says behavioral health support personnel means an individual who works under the direct supervision of qualifying personnel to support and track a student's progress and access to and completion of school curriculum, and support students by prompting, redirecting, encouraging, and reinforcing positive behaviors. So that is what the bill labeled the behavioral health support personnel's tasks.
So I would say that this list under behavioral health support personnel training in this rule 622 goes way beyond the scope of the code, and many of those things should be taken out. And if you want to read those again from the code, I will strike anything that from this list that is not specifically mentioned in the code.
Okay. Any other?
Would you read them again from the code?
Sure. So the behavioral health support personnel means an individual who works under the direct supervision of qualifying personnel to support and track a student's progress and access to and completion of school curriculum, and support students by prompting, redirecting, encouraging, and reinforcing positive behaviors.
Okay, I don't see any of those on the list, so I would move to strike lines 20, let me make sure I get them right. 25 through 34, actually 25 through 35, and replace it with the things that she just listed.
Do we have that up on the, well, sorry. Is there a second to that? Okay, hearing no second. I think we're back to the underlying motion. If I'm tracking correctly. So the motion then, remember Lear's light on? Okay. The motion then is that the board approves R277-662 School-Based Mental Health Qualifying Grant Program Amendment Draft 1 on second and final reading. Let's start from the bottom. Member Wood.
No.
Member Woods, no on the underlying motion. Okay, Member Straight.
Yes. Isn't that the underlying motion?
The blue one?
The
It's
motion
underlying
now
motion.
before the board is the committee motion, which was to
I
recommend
apologize. I
approval of
missed
the
no
rule.
second.
Okay,
Somehow we discussed things and sometimes they shouldn't even go to discussion if there's no second, so.
that was just at the end there, she teed up a motion. And so after some dialogue on, there was
It's
a
been so
motion
long, I
to
forgot.
substitute. There was no second, so, okay.
I apologize.
That was a no, and Member Straight?
Yes.
So I would change my vote to a yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay.
It's been so.
Yes from Member Wood, yes from Member Straight, Member Reel?
Yes.
I can't manage all of you.
Member Norton?
Yes.
Member Lear?
Yes.
Who's managing Member
Yes,
Lear?
I am.
Okay, Member Hymus?
Yes.
Member Hart?
Yes.
Member Green? Vice Chair Earl?
No.
Member Davis?
Yes.
Member Klein?
No.
Member Booth?
Yes.
Member Bogus?
No.
And I'm a yes. So that motion passes, and we are back to Member Chair Hymus.
Thank you. Agenda item 11.10, R277-623, School Climate Survey. This is an amendment. The motion for the board is that the committee moves that the board approve R277-623 School Climate Survey, Draft 1 on second and final reading. However, Chair, as you know, we've had quite a extensive conversation and debate on this already. And so if it is okay, I'd like to present another potential motion for this rule. Is that appropriate?
That will require a second, but go ahead.
Well, let me throw it out there
Tee
and
it
we'll
up.
see what happens.
Yep. It's in order.
That the board do two things. One, refer R277-623 back to committee. And two, recommends that the legislature's School Safety Task Force review the statutory requirements related to the school climate survey and determine whether amendments to Utah code are necessary or recommended.
I'll second that.
Second, third, and fourth. Would you like to speak to the motion?
Let me just speak briefly. There's obviously some confusion or some misunderstanding between code and rule and everything else that was discussed today. We need to bring this back to gain better understanding, not only with staff, but with the legislature. We need to figure out who this survey is for. Is it for the LEA or for the SEA? There's just work to be done, and I am doubtful we'll get it done here.
Okay. Second's been had. Any discussion of the motion? Member Lear,
I guess
your lights
not.
on?
I wanted, if Jenny was going to make a, you going to make a substitute motion?
No, I was gonna do that motion,
Okay,
even though we didn't.
I support that motion. Oops. Yes, I support that motion. I just think there's a misunderstanding that was presented here about the confidentiality section, and I want to make sure that that is addressed correctly. And that's why I was concerned about Member Earl was going to make a motion for a substitute on the fly. So-
I'm not sure if I
Oh,
may,
I
Chair.
just said, Mr. Mortensen, I believe didn't interpret that
Okay.
section correctly, and I want to make sure that in that discussion, that correct interpretation goes to what the student is telling about himself, not about anything to do with sex or family or whatever.
And that should be encompassed within those conversations, I think, is what, yeah.
Okay. Any further discussion of the motion? Seeing none, let's vote. Motion is that the board refer R277-623 back to committee and recommends that the legislature's School Safety Task Force review the statutory requirements related to the school climate survey and determine whether amendments to Utah code are necessary or recommended. Okay, Member Bogus.
Yes.
Member Booth.
Yes.
Member Klein.
Yes.
Member Davis.
Yes.
Vice Chair Earl.
Yes.
Member Green.
Yes.
Vice Chair Hart.
Yes.
Member Hymus.
Yes.
Member Lear.
Yes.
Member Norton.
Yes.
Member Reel.
Yes.
Member Straight.
Yes.
Member Wood.
Yes.
And Member Moss is a yes. That's unanimous. Thank you. Back to Chair Hymus.
Agenda item 11.11, R277-625, mental health screeners. This is an amendment. The motion for the board is that the committee moves that the board approve R277-625, mental health screeners, draft 1 on second and final reading.
Discussion of that motion, seeing none, let's vote. Member Wood.
I have my,
Oh, I'm sorry, there's a light.
sorry, I'm looking at, and maybe staff can help answer this, line 32 and 45. It seems, hopefully I have those line numbers right. It seems like they're contradictory. The one says it's, that the mental health screener is not a system or process used by a student's teacher to observe behavior for targeted learning interventions. And the other one says, high need for interventions based on LEA's mental health screener. They seem contradictory, like, is it or is it not?
We have somebody,
We have
Who's that?
Michelle.
oh, Tiana?
We have Michelle Knight, who should be online, and she's in the room, ready to respond. Is Michelle Knight in there?
Michelle?
Michelle got the wrong link. Oh, she's here. Good, sorry.
Hi. Sorry about that.
Welcome, Michelle, thank you.
Thank you so much. I apologize. I just jumped on and I missed the question. Do you mind repeating?
Sure. I'm looking at lines 32 and 45 in the mental health screeners rule, 625. So lines 32 and 45, they seem contradictory to me. The first one says, mental health screener is not a system or process used by a student's teacher to observe behaviors for targeted learning interventions. And 45 says, a high need for interventions based on LEA's mental health screener. So is the mental health screener used to observe or detect or identify behaviors for intervention?
So the mental health screener would be a systemic tool to be used to determine if a further assessment would be needed. So I would say no to that.
Okay, well, line 45 doesn't read that way to me. It sounds like it is. So,
Superintendent Dixon references that this is connected to qualifying for financial assistance. So that's part of sub 5.
Sorry, sub 5?
but it still says.
Section 5.
Yeah, it still says interventions based on results of a mental health screener. And yet in 32, it says that the mental health screener is not used to help students observe behaviors for interventions.
Chair, could I?
Chair Hymas?
Just briefly, we've spent probably over an hour on exploratory questions without a motion on the floor. Can we streamline our processes and speak to a motion or move on the one that's on the
Do
floor?
we have a motion, Member Klein?
I will make a motion, but not on that one, but I would like an answer at some point.
Okay.
On line 136, I move to add the language so that it reads mental health screener and all possible supports or interventions that could be implemented based on the results of a student participating in the screener before consenting. I hope I got that language right. Let's see. Yes, I just want to get to that place on here. So let's see. Okay, so line 135 and 136 is what I'm looking at. So after it says mental health screener on line 136, I would add, and all possible supports or interventions that could be implemented based on, based on the results of a student participating in the screener, and then continue on with the rest of the line before consenting to a student's mental health screening.
Do we have a second?
So in its entirety, do you want me to read the whole sentence? Because I wasn't, so you can hear the
Sure, let's just
beginning?
make sure we've got it and then see if there's any discussion of the motion.
Okay. And all possible supports and interventions, or interventions that could be implemented based on the results of a student participating in the screener. It says, mental, let's see. Before consenting, so, yes, okay, so that's the added language. If you want, I can read the entire sentence. An LEA shall provide a parent with a list of all data potentially collected by the mental health screener and all possible supports and interventions that could be implemented based on the results of a student participating in the screener before consenting to a student's mental health screener or screening.
Okay, and we did have a second, I think, did we? So discussion of that motion? Seeing none. Motion is to add on line 135 to 36, and all possible supports or interventions that could be implemented based on the results of a student participating in the screener. Member Wood?
No.
Member Straight? No. Member Reel?
No.
Member Norton?
No.
Member Lear? No. Member Hymus?
No.
Vice Chair Hart?
No.
Member Green? Vice Chair Earl?
No.
Member Davis?
No.
Member Klein?
Yes.
Member Booth?
No.
Member Bogus?
Yes.
And I am a no. Okay, so back to the underlying motion. Further discussion to that motion.
Can I ask a question of our staff?
Let's see if there's a motion. We need to kind of move from discovery to motions. I think that's a well-taken point. So is there discussion to this motion? We do have discussion of the underlying motion. If there's nothing, we'll move to a vote. Member Bogus then.
So sorry, what?
We are to a vote on the underlying motion that came out of committee that the board approves R277-625, mental health screeners amendment draft 1 on second and final reading.
No.
So, Member Booth,
Yes.
Member Klein,
No.
Member Davis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Earl,
No.
Member Green,
No.
Member Hart, Vice Chair Hart,
No.
Member Hymus,
Yes.
Member Lear,
Yes.
Member Norton,
Yes.
Member Reel, Member Straight,
Yep.
Member Wood,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. That motion passes. And back to Chair Hymus.
Thank you. Agenda item 11.12, this is a USEEP recommendations on best practices for the recruitment and retention of special education paraeducators. It's an interesting motion. There's two motions here, but out of respect, the committee wanted to inform the board. Hopefully you've read USEEP's recommendations, and then there's a motion. But just briefly, USEEP recommendation 1, let me just read them here. The first one was that the committee directs staff to develop a list of best practices for LEAs to help recruit and retain paraeducators and forward to the board for approval. The second recommendation was that the committee directs staff to require LEAs to submit an annual supply and demand report on special education teachers and paraeducators and forward to the board for approval. After a discussion in committee, the following motions came forward. First, the motion for the board, and I don't know if you want to vote on these separately, Chair, or if we want to. I guess that wasn't discussed, because there are two motions. So let me just present the first one, we can vote, and then we'll go to the second one. Is that okay? So the motion
you present goes to the floor.
Motion before the board, the committee moves that the board approve the provided list of best practices for LEAs to help recruit and retain paraeducators. And this was direct verbiage, I believe, from the recommendation of USEEP.
So that doesn't require a second. I do have a question, but Member Straight first?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh. Does the committee ultimately recommend both of these motions then? Is that where we're going? As opposed to in the alternative?
The second motion has a slight variation of the recommendation.
So is it an either or then, or are these motions complementary?
They're independent of one another.
Okay, that's what I'm getting at. These are not any element of overlap,
Right.
either or. Both of them are coming out for recommendation. Okay, any other comments, questions? Okay, the first motion is before the board, that the board approves the provided list of best practices for LEAs to help recruit and retain paraeducators. Member Bogus,
No.
Member Booth,
Yes.
Member Klein, Member Davis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Earl. Yes. Member Green.
Yes.
Vice Chair Hart.
Yes.
Member Hymus.
Yes.
Member Lear. Yes. Member Norton.
Yes.
Member Reel.
Yes.
Member Straight.
Yes.
Member Wood.
Yes.
Almost 7. I should just check if Member Carey is out there. Not yet. Member Moss is a yes. Okay. Back to you, Chair Hymus.
Second motion for the board is that the committee moves that the board receive USEEP recommendation 2 and direct staff to develop and send to LEAs an option supply and demand survey on special education teachers and paraeducators. So that's the motion for the board. So the difference is USEEP was wanting to require this. We want to keep it optional.
Got it. Any discussion to that motion?
Point of order, should that say optional, not option?
Ah, yes.
An optional, yes.
Send to LEAs an
Good catch.
optional supply and demand survey. Okay, any discussion to that motion?
I just have a point of clarification, maybe. My reading of Robert's rules says that receiving things is not an option.
Well, let's see. Receives it and directs staff to develop and send.
I don't know.
Member
Unless-
Vice Chair Earl?
I do think we can receive, these are recommendations, we don't have to implement, we receive them, so. But we're directing something to happen.
Yeah, we do direct. So we received the USEEP, if you don't want to vote on receiving it, we all received it, but we are directing staff to develop and send to LEAs. I guess that's more so what we're voting on here.
Yeah.
What's
So
the ruling?
we do receive sometimes reports and such, but in this context, it appears to be simply a component of what we're going to direct coming out of that recommendation. So any obstacle?
I don't see anything in the index here of Robert's rules that we're going to receiving, so.
Okay, I think member's point is well taken. I think here the idea is we're going to receive that, and from those recommendations, we're going to direct staff, right? So let's vote then,
Well,
unless
Chair
there are
Boss,
further,
just-
oh, sorry, Member Wood.
This was my motion because it was out of respect. We have an outside committee who had done some work and came, and I felt like if we just bypassed it, it didn't offer respect to the process. And so I said, if we receive it, then the whole board would see it and offer some respect to that outside
Got it. So we do receive reports sometimes and just vote to receive them, and then it kind of goes in the record, right? In this case, we're receiving it and then acting on it. So, okay, Member Klein?
Receiving it implies that we agree with it.
I don't know that that's the case. Maybe we can put our, we've had a couple things last year, notably the Accountability Task Force report. We received it, didn't act on it. Any ruling from our parliamentary folks, does the receiving mean that we accept it and, or agree with it? I'm sorry, was that the question? Whether we agree with it?
And I would say no. And clearly anyone could listen to this conversation, pull it up and get the intent of the board that it's not intending to accept it, rather just to receive it.
Right, okay. And from that, what we're doing is very clearly spelled out. Direct staff to develop and send to LEAs an optional supply and demand survey. Okay, members, let's vote. We'll start with member, did you have another question or am
I actually researched this pretty extensively, and I guess I would move to amend the motion to strike that the board receives the recommendation. If the
Okay.
board wants to direct staff, that's their business, but I would move to strike the language that we receive the recommendation.
Do you have a Robert's Rules reference for us?
No, sir, I'm not subject to parliamentary inquiry. But I will,
Well,
I honestly, I will get
all
you
right
one.
then.
No,
I was
that
just
did not mean-
checking.
I will get it for you and I will email it. Yes, I will.
Fair enough. Just checking. All right. So the motion to amend is to strike, sorry? Motion is that, yeah, I'm going to frame it up. The motion is that the board strikes, receives USEP recommendation to and from the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Seconded. Okay, discussion on that motion? To strike, receive. Okay, let's start with Member Wood.
No.
Member Straight.
No.
Member Reel.
No.
No, no.
Member Norton.
No.
No.
Member Lear. I'm sorry, Member Hymus.
No.
I'm not looking up. Vice Chair Hart.
No.
Member Green. Vice Chair Earl.
No.
Member Davis.
No.
Member Klein.
Yes.
Member Booth.
Heck, no.
Member Bogus.
Yes.
All right, and I'm a no. So that fails. Anything further to the underlying motion? That motion is then that the board receives USEP recommendation 2 and directs staff to develop and send to LEAs an optional supply and demand survey on special education teachers and paraeducators.
Receives.
So Member Bogus to the motion. No. Member Booth.
Yes.
Member Klein.
No.
Member Davis.
Yes.
Vice Chair Earl.
Yes.
Member Green. Yes. Vice Chair Hart.
Yes.
Member Hymus.
Yes.
Member Lear.
Yes.
Member Norton.
Yes.
Member Reel.
Yes.
Member Straight.
Yes.
Member Wood.
Yes.
And Member Moss is a yes. Okay, thank you. Back to,
Chair Moss, point of order.
yes.
It does say that to receive a motion is meaningless in terms of Robert's rules, but I did get my way because I got the thing read by the board, so.
Okay. The record reflect that. We got it. We got it in. Okay. And we can review it. It's in our inbox.
It's in 3.27 that to receive a report is meaningless. My husband made me buy it online so I could search it.
3.27, all right. All right, let's see, back to, I think we have a final action item from Chair Hymus.
We do. Thank you. This is agenda item 11.13, Board Policy 4002, Advisory Council for the Utah Schools for the Deaf and the Blind. The motion for the board is that the committee moves that the board approve Board Policy 4002, Advisory Council for the Utah Schools for the Deaf and the Blind, Draft 1.
Any discussion to that motion? Okay, board members, please vote. Member Bogus, oh, was that a light for this, or just a vote? Okay, Member Bogus.
Yes.
Member Booth.
Yes.
Member Klein.
Yes.
Member Davis.
Yes.
Vice Chair Earl.
Yes.
Member Green.
Yes.
Vice Chair Hart.
Yes.
Member Hymus.
Yes.
Member Lear.
Yes.
Member Norton.
Yes.
Member Reel.
Yes.
Member Straight.
Yes.
Member Wood.
Yes.
And Member Moss is a yes. So that passes as well. And
That
does
concludes our
conclude-
report. Thank you.
It does. And I'll just reference and thanks on this one. On the last one, it was a non-voting member from the board. I think we all know Leanne Wood. Member Wood has accepted that appointment. So the rule change we just approved will be filled by Member Wood, and thankful for her service to USDB.